Less than 6 months out from Election Day, polls are continuing to tighten as the presidential race heats up. Former President Trump is continuing his run as a convicted felon, campaigning in Las Vegas and making a much-needed push in Nevada.
For 3.5 years, the people of Nevada have had a front row seat to Joe Biden's evil and criminal obliteration of our southern border. It was criminal what he's done.
And over in the Biden campaign, the president continues to seize onto comments made by Trump and his conviction, with hopes of convincing voters that the former president is not fit to be commander-in-chief again. But will that strategy work? Or will Biden need to move forward and focus on showing voters why he should be the one elected this November? Here to go on the record is Director of Data Science from Decision Desk HQ, Scott Tranter. Scott, thank you so much for joining us. Let's jump right into it. The election will come down to a handful of states, many of which Biden won in 2020. I want to take a closer look at Nevada following Trump's campaign stop there over the weekend. What are the latest numbers from Decision Desk's new forecasting tool in predicting the presidential outcome in Nevada?
So right now we have a slight advantage for Donald Trump in Nevada. And I can see that one going back and forth quite a bit over the next couple months. That's a battleground state, both at the Senate and the presidential level. We see Donald Trump making inroads with Hispanic voters, which, you know, if he continues to do that, it's going to make Nevada very competitive. Also, you know, we saw his speech this weekend. He's doing what politicians do. When he came out and said, look, I'm going to make tipped wage workers tips, you know, tax free. That's a direct appeal to the wage workers and the tip workers in Nevada, which there are a lot of them. You know, so he's certainly making a play for that one there, and I expect that one to be close all the way to the end.
Yeah, big hospitality industry, obviously, in the greater Las Vegas area. So I want to come back east to Pennsylvania, which Biden won in 2020. Decision Desk has Trump leading in that state now. What are the former president's chances of flipping Pennsylvania back to red as of this week?
Look, it's pretty strong. He's in the low 50s there, and that is a state. Look, Biden likes to say he's the second son of Pennsylvania. In terms of where he's from, it's going to be a tough one simply because the dynamics and fundamentals of where Pennsylvania is. It's a state that really is reactive. The voters are really reactive to the economy, which we know has been the number one issue. It's got, especially Western Pennsylvania, it's got a lot of those non-college educated voters that Trump does extremely well with. And, you know, Donald Trump is making some inroads in the African-American vote, which will make him not necessarily competitive in Philadelphia, but will chip away at some votes that Joe Biden's going to need in the fall. All that being said, Pennsylvania has historically been a Democratic state in some of these close contests. You know, we saw this in 2020, so I don't expect Joe Biden to give it up easily. But right now, Donald Trump's got an edge, and he's got a little bit of momentum there.
Yeah, and Donald Trump has won Pennsylvania before, shocked a lot of people when he flipped it in 2016. So he certainly has a history there. Want to go to Wisconsin, which Donald Trump also won in 2016, but lost in 2020. What are we seeing in that state? What's the state of play?
Very similar to Pennsylvania. I would say that one is probably a little bit more competitive and maybe a little bit more momentum for Joe Biden. And that's just because of where we see some of the Senate race coming. Obviously, Donald Trump's winning there, but I think we're going to see some polling come out and some fundraising that's gonna get Biden a little bit more competitive there. And again, that's in contrast to Pennsylvania. What I will say is this: historically, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, they vote as a block. We haven't seen them split, go, two for one candidate and one for the other, or vice versa, in, at least 4 or 5 election cycles, if not more. And so I look at this as Wisconsin getting competitive. Where we are in Pennsylvania, we may talk about in Michigan in a minute. These are all going to vote as a block.
Georgia was definitely the state to watch in 2020 when Biden flipped it and Democrats at the Senate level also flipped it. But it's looking a lot tougher for the president this year. So in the case that Biden were to lose Georgia and Trump were to flip it back to red, what states would Biden need to win in order to, still win the election?
So we talked about 2 of them already: Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. The other one is Michigan. He wins those 3. He's pretty much going to eke at about 270, maybe a little bit more electoral votes, even if he loses Nevada and Arizona. Nevada and Arizona, as we've talked about, very close. A lot of momentum for Trump out there. Still a lot of time to go. But I think, you bring up a good point about Georgia. It's a state that Joe Biden won last time, but he won very, very closely. And fundamentally, Georgia is a Republican state. I know we've been talking about it as a battleground state at the Senate and the presidential level for a couple cycles now. But that one is, solidly in Donald Trump's column at the moment. It'll be competitive. Both sides will spend money, but he's going to be favored to win there this fall.
So we've been watching the polls closely after Trump's conviction, and we aren't seeing much of an impact as of yet. But a new CBS YouGov poll shows 28% of likely voters saying Trump's conviction will factor into their vote in November. Could we not see the impact of Trump's conviction until Election Day a few months from now?
Certainly, but by that, I think we'll be talking about, hey, was there some other campaign event, a debate or a fundraising or a gaffe or something affecting it? What I found interesting about that stat you put up there in that CBS poll is, while 28% said they did, at the end of the day, the top line didn't move a whole lot. So, and again, voters can take time to discuss and figure out what really impacts them. They still may be figuring out the verdict and what it means for them. But I think my big takeaway post verdict is the polls really haven't moved a whole lot. Despite voters saying it's factoring into them. It's kind of like saying, look, I'm gonna go on a diet tomorrow, but they still haven't changed their ways yet.
So when looking at this case, I think, the biggest divide, and we see this very clearly in the top lines, is how Democrats and Republicans approach this and view the prosecution. 80% of Republicans believe Trump was charged at the direction of the Biden administration. There's no evidence to suggest that at all. But how much of an impact could these unproven theories have on Biden's 2024 chances?
I think it could have a pretty big impact. And I think we're seeing that in terms of Biden's favorability and the fact that the incumbent president is behind in a couple of these states now. Because you showed Democrats and Republicans there, but there are a healthy chunk of independents who also think the same. Not a majority, but depending on the poll, 20 or 30% of independents think that the legal stuff is the prosecution is politically motivated. That's detrimental. As you pointed out, there's no evidence to point that out, but perception's reality for a lot of voters, and they're remembering that as they pick their candidate.
I want to stick with that same CBS YouGov poll that also shows an increase in voters supporting Biden. Their reasoning is to oppose Trump. So could we see Biden win the election for the sole reason that voters just don't want Trump elected to a second term? I think back to 2016, and it seemed like a lot of Hillary Clinton's message was, elect me, I'm not him. And we know how that turned out for her.
Yeah, I'd look at that more as not necessarily a voters, expanding Joe Biden's voter base because of that, but more strengthening the voters he does have. It's going to motivate him. Joe Biden needs to raise money. He needs to, garner enthusiasm and momentum. We talked about a little bit about where I see the momentum in Pennsylvania, and it looks like on Trump's side, same in Nevada. Joe Biden's got a few months left in the campaign. He's going to have to recapture that. And I think motivated voters like that, and that is a motivating factor, will be good. But as you pointed out, you've got to offer voters an alternative, not just a, hey, I'm better than that guy.
Scott Tranter, thank you so much for joining us as always.
Thanks for having me.
That's it for What's America Thinking. I'm Julia Manchester. Come back next week. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel.